All right, so great. Happy to be here today with Ansley Sawyer, the producer and director of the 2017 film Like We Don't Exist. Welcome, Ansley. I'm wondering if we could start, if you could give a brief background of yourself, your kind of experience and maybe, just experience.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really great to be here again with you once more. It's always a pleasure to speak about my experience with the Karenni community. And Like We Don't Exist is a film actually released in 2018. And I'm a co-director with Corey Embring, who's also the director of photography and the editor of the film. And we both shot the film, and I'm the producer for the film. And we worked with a number of really incredible people that tells the story of one community's journey and experience through nearly 70 years of civil war in southeastern Burma, also called Myanmar. So we are docu-vérité filmmakers, and our vision was really to create a short film that facilitates a community conversation surrounding the impacts of refugee matters, urban and rural displacement, diaspora from Southeastern Asia, all over the rest of the world. And the film is a 34-minute montage of over 30 different perspectives and diverse lived experiences as shared with us through interview and also just through fly-on-the-wall style cinematography to show a very blended point of view that talks about, women's rights, education, war, response to war, the need and desire for revenge, and being able to move forward as a community, still experiencing the impact, sadly, increasingly so since the distribution of this film, with the uptick in aggression and violence experienced internally in Myanmar, starting with the Spring Revolution in 2021 and progressing to this day with airstrikes and artillery fire and, terrible atrocities being committed against ethnic minorities such as the Karenni. It's also important to establish that this is one of over 24 ethnic minorities in southeastern Myanmar that are experiencing the same effects of genocide, atrocities, simply based upon their ethnic status, which creates, in UNHCR terms, really urgent problems to solve for hundreds of thousands of people. My work with the Karenni was primarily based on the Thai side of the border, where there is a refugee camp, and also a Karenni community in the Thai area as well, and also in the southeastern state of Myanmar called Karenni or Kaya state. And anybody who wants to check it out, you can watch it for free, like wedon'texist.com, and it's to be used as a tool to share and start conversations surrounding the impacts of this global migration.
Great. Thank you so much, Ansley, for sharing a bit about your background and also the context of the Karenni. This is a context that not a lot of folks, especially in the Western world, are familiar with. This is a refugee crisis that's been going on for decades, and like you mentioned, has recently been kind of exacerbated by the ongoing and growing conflict inside Myanmar. There's been kind of reverse flows back across the border into Thailand of Karenni and Karen and even ethnically Burmese folks recently due to the ongoing violence. Since it is kind of a relatively unknown context, what really drew you to this topic and what inspired you to pursue making this film?
Oh, that's such a great question. Like many things, so I'm a documentary filmmaker. I live in New York City. I make lots of short films about human interest stories, as well as, I also have a commercial production company. But what really drew my interest to this film was in 2016, I was traveling through Thailand and I met some local people whose personal story really fascinated me. One person, his name was John, and he became a close personal friend, and he really inspired the story that Corey and myself, my co-director and myself, we had a heart to learn more about this situation. Essentially, there are people who live in other countries, essentially stateless, without paperwork, really put in very desperate situations because they've had to flee their homeland, which was obviously not something that they wanted to do. So we were really inspired by John's story, and we were actually at the moment looking for a film to make on this subject because we both are really impacted by refugee rights, and that's really the kind of story that we wanted to tell. And we thought it was going to be a 5-minute film, and we ended up quitting our jobs and moving to Thailand to pursue production of this film full time, because what started kind of small, we realized to do justice, we needed a larger format and a bigger vision. And one thing since this film's distribution that both Corey and myself have been really touched by is the way that it has started conversations organically without our input. It sort of catalyzed a community conversation where, for example, when Karenni people have come to the United States or Canada or Finland or Australia, many times the receiving community isn't aware of their story, and as diminutive by nature, but also slightly traumatized population that just kind of wants to start over, start their second chapter, there often isn't that chance for sharing on a community level. And so people, coworkers, neighbors, don't necessarily know what the Karenni have been through. And we've been really fortunate to watch a number of grassroots organizations sort of in this greater moment that we have perhaps contributed to. I won't say that we caused it, but it's been really encouraging to see the next generation of Karenni youth pick up the microphone and claim their own platform to share their story, because they've seen the power that storytelling can have on an international stage for advocacy, for being able to insist upon change.
That's great. That's one thing I've noticed with my work with the Karenni community as well, is young people are very empowered and very passionate about, sharing about their history and traditions and their culture, and they're very interested in supporting that and protecting that. And it seems like the film has done a good job of empowering these young people to kind of engage in this kind of work per se.
Yeah, well, that's the remarkable thing about media and documentary specifically, is that it's the most democratic art form, and arguably it's the art form that's the most accessible of at least the last century and increasingly this century. I mean, being able to just use your phone to capture a story, that's something that we did in the documentary, and we really made a point during production of the film to engage youth as well, who wanted to work with us and wanted to use their own life experience, and who have also gone on to pursue careers in media. And that's not just documentary, which is inherently editorial, but journalism, which in this moment in Burma, in Myanmar, is so important because of the lack of democracy, the throttling of the free press, and in fact, the imprisonment, we've seen of American journalists as well as Burmese and ethnic minority journalists to be able to speak their truth. It is a very inherently risky process, especially in this moment of civil war, and to be able to reach out and support the youth in taking hold of their truth, because when someone shares their life experience, you can't disagree with it. And that's the power of, I think, what we accomplished in this film was, we said to somebody, tell us about how your father was killed. And so if somebody says, this is what happened in this order, that's just a statement of facts. And then when you see the emotional impact of the human consequence, it really brings to light how much change we need to make in this world.
Wow, powerful stuff for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, I always warn people. They're like, I really want to watch that film, and I'm like, do it on a Friday after yoga with a bottle of wine and like a box of tissue. Like it's yeah.
I remember the first time I saw the film, having worked with the Karenni community prior to seeing the film, and just the impact it had on me. It's like you just said, it was very similar, and seeing a lot of faces that I was familiar with, and locations, and hearing stories that I had heard, but in a different light, and seeing it portrayed through kind of documentary and through film medium it granted even a different perspective to a lot of the stories I'd heard from folks directly.
Oh, thanks, Duncan. Yeah, I like to say, like, if this conflict could have been solved by now, it would have been something more than a few late 20-something, early 30-somethings could do with a short film. And so I think the power of the film, and perhaps documentary at large, or journalism, and the important work we're doing in migration studies, is just in creating a space, and as we've said, to allow the people themselves to create their own platform to share their own story, and just empowering them, saying this is how you do it. I should say too, the work is ongoing. I mean, the story is consistently evolving, and just because the film is released doesn't mean the need for international attention, at the very least, is less warranted. I mean, currently the civil war has just escalated to an enormous extent, and there's a complete lack of reporting on the ground, and all I have is Telegram and Signal and WhatsApp, and people just telling me we are refugees now. You know, we used to live there, and people who previously weren't displaced are. I mean, this conflict has been ongoing constantly since 1947, and in fact, it just looks like it's escalating to a point that I can't recognize a solid conclusion. So, you know, people in the face of such atrocity, it's hard to be able to recommend necessarily hope beyond investing in youth and really helping to make change in this generation, if not the next as well. But also my co-director, Corey Embringy, is going back to Thailand with somebody who's a member of this refugee diaspora, and she's a youth leader in the upstate New York community, being able to show that, you know, international attention is important. And I like to say, it's okay that you didn't know about it before, but now that you know, what are you going to do? And even being aware of it and following the news and supporting, you know, Karenni Youth of Buffalo in their, you know, fundraising, you know, to be able to go back to Thailand to share the ongoing story. That kind of community involvement is possible and important and very necessary.
Excellent. Yeah, this is something I kind of wanted to touch on a bit later, but it's a kind of a good segue into it now. You know, with the escalating rates of violence and, you know, growing airstrikes in Karenni State, and you know, the refugee camps were also, prior to the coup, suffering a funding crisis with a lack of resources, which was straining kind of systems in the camps even prior to the eruption of violence last year. You mentioned some great ways of, you know, ways that can stay informed. Are there ways that maybe the general public can, you know, support the Karenni community, or those fighting for democracy and freedom inside Burma, regardless of ethnicity? Or even if you have some good sources and information that people can follow to stay updated, some good independent journalism, perhaps, that's unbiased and gives a good picture of what's happening on the ground, both in Myanmar and along the border.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people think that their community hasn't been impacted by something like refugees coming to the United States. And one of the most incredible things about the Karenni diaspora within the United States specifically, but also within Canada, is that it's small communities like Winston-Salem, North Carolina, or Austin, Minnesota, or Springdale, Arkansas. It's not Chicago, you know, New York, LA for the most part, because they want to get a 30-year mortgage and they want to send their kids to a good school. And that tends to be growing rural communities that have job suppliers like Hormel, you know, or Walmart. So the best way to support Karenni communities is to look within your own community, because even if it isn't Karenni, it might be Karen or Kachin or even Rohingya, because these are all, you know, different branching members of the same, unfortunately, root civil war within Myanmar. So if you want to support someone within your own community, you can just literally Google refugee, you know, and your zip code, and there's bound to be a community. Facebook actually is a remarkable resource for this. And I found, like, we went over 25 different cities in the United States and did a community conversation. Sometimes we would speak at universities, churches, community centers, local government, you name it, you know, and everywhere we went, there were 500 or more Karenni, and it was in some places I'd never heard of. And a lot of those people need furniture when they move into town, or they want to learn how to become computer literate or how to take the bus. And those are really important things that local organizations fund and support, not just with money, if you're not in a financial situation to do that, but also with time, just being a good neighbor and spending time with people who have been recently relocated, because it makes a really big difference. So that's something that everyday people can do. Otherwise, I'd say donating you give me a second, Duncan, I can actually give you a concrete resource. Give me one quick second. I just have to Google it.
Sure, yeah. And I also have a list of Instagram
Please.
accounts to follow and kind of grassroots organizations on the ground inside Karenni States, inside Burma, that folks can follow and they can donate to. Katie, I can pass those along to you and Helen so they can be included in the transcript if that's something that's that would be helpful. But there's lots of good, grassroots journalism happening by people themselves at a community level, and that's where a lot of the actual unbiased, really kind of clear information is coming from. A lot of it is very unfiltered. And that's something I've noticed with the past year, knowing so many folks inside Myanmar and along the border. Karenni and Burmese social media is purely very unfiltered. You're seeing directly what's going on pretty much some of the times. And a lot of times that can be jarring, but you are kind of witnessing, obviously not directly what's happening, but you're able to see a good picture and get a good understanding of what's happening on the ground.
Absolutely. Another really great Instagram handle is The Boys in Myanmar.
Yes.
Which is not just Karenni, but it's also, it's six brothers in Yangon to fight against the military. But it's also incredibly unfiltered. So
I believe one of the boys in Myanmar he's been in Karenni State for the past couple months, actually, living and documenting one of the PDF forces, the People's Defense Forces in Myanmar. So if folks are interested in having kind of an inside look into this kind of civilian defense force that has risen to resist the kind of oppression and violence of the Tatmadaw, The Boys in Myanmar, Ansley, like you said, is a great resource.
Yeah. Also sharing the International Rescue Committee, obviously, but not just the international organization, but there are also local chapters. And many places that I've gone, there's been local offices who actually really do a lot of work in these communities. So, Albuquerque, IRC, just looking into that, or even when we were in San Diego, like we worked with the local office there. And, there's unfortunately in this moment, migration crises, on the Mexican border, all from all over, all up through the Darien Gap. I mean, we're dealing with Syria, we're dealing with Ukraine. And so it's a very sobering moment to see how the Western world is continuing to not respond to the urgency of the situation in Myanmar. And often it's really an issue of international, what's the US state interest in Myanmar besides geopolitical proximity to China and, hydroelectric resource. I mean, it can get that brutal. And it's so important to remember that these are valuable people who have been through multi-generational civil war, who deserve, if not repatriation, at least reconciliation. And many choose to go to third countries. And for those who decide to join a new community, just being welcomed, I've had experiences with religious organizations that do incredible work, like remarkably incredible work. And I'd say it's like 50-50. So I'm not even religious myself. And I volunteer, at churches agnostically to be able to help with some of these relocation efforts. So, I mean, really, if it's an issue after you watch the film that really speaks to your heart, there's a way that you can, as an individual, get involved. But I think the situation more broadly is fascinating because not only are they no longer really a sovereign nation, in terms of being able to have a phone and call other countries and have data access, and the transparency of the Karenni experience at the moment is incredibly low. And so the importance of paying attention to this story is more urgent than ever before. I'm just ringing a big bell.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually segues into our next little section here in this interview. Kind of going back to the film and kind of some of the perspectives of the film. The film does a really good job about centering Karenni perspectives and Karenni voices. I wonder if you could speak maybe a little bit to the importance of this, how you, in planning the film, managed and kind of planned to center these voices, and how did community-led engagement kind of guide the making of the film and its impact going forward?
That's a great question. We wanted to center Karenni voices in the film, and more broadly in the conversations following the film, To do this, we had John, who inspired the film, as a part of our film staff. So working with us every day in a managerial perspective so that his voice came through in the edit. Living in the community, making sure that all of our translators, transcribers, all of the people that we hired were from within the community, and asking advice. Every time we had a cut, we would show it to a Karenni person, our friends, essentially, you know, we're talking to them on WhatsApp, and making sure that, you know, a cut that we made isn't accidentally hilarious, which actually happened once. You know, when we show the film to an English audience, the subtitles feel very somber for one section. And then if you show it to a Karenni audience, they all burst out laughing, which really confused us at first. But when you see the film, it's about a man saying like he's ashamed he can't go back to the camp because he doesn't have enough money, which is apparently hilarious in the original language, but in the translation, it's very sobering. So making sure that, you know, we were really respectful of the fact that we wanted to create a platform to share their voices. And a frequent critique of documentary film, not journalism, is the inherent editorialization. So the fact that the editor's voice is baked in to the film process, which is the distinction between journalism and art. So this is on the side of art. And so in doing so, it was important to represent the dreamlike quality of inherited generational trauma and joy and traditions. And in doing so, it's not all literal. And so I guess I'd say that it was important to saturate ourselves within the Karenni and blended Thai community to try to give a feeling, not just facts about the situation. Because when you touch someone's heart on a human level, it never leaves you. And that's, I think, my whole theory of filmmaking is that's how you actually make change in the world, is you dismantle prejudice by empathy, by empathic association. If you see somebody saying that they just want to be happy or they just want to be safe, you know, just all the things that humans want, no matter what we look like or what language we speak or what we've been through, to kind of create that human connection. And it was very important that we maintained that human connection, you know, that we were constantly asking questions about what we didn't know and surrounding ourselves with people much smarter than us to condense that communal knowledge into our impression of the diverse range of human experience at that moment. And of course, everything changes. And I don't know if it's evergreen, but I can say that the human experience witnessed in the production of the film has been something I've noticed in other places in the world, sadly. And we see this in Ukraine, we see this in Syria, we see this in Panama, you know, with Haitian immigrants. And I just like to encourage people to investigate, you know, especially from a migration resources point of view. What are the ways that you can make change in a community? What are the common denominators? If you invest in education, does it have an outsized impact on benefiting the community internally, giving them the resources they need, not just to constantly receive, which is so often the problem in refugee advocacy, but in helping them to develop their own solutions so that they invest in their own leadership to create solutions for the community itself, which is anti-imperialist, essentially. That's what I think.
Yeah,
and I think the common denominator is education, personally. So we consistently invest in education within the Karenni community, and we've seen that it's helped. And other organizations think other things help. So
yeah, that's great. I definitely agree. I think empowering kind of community-led change from the bottom up, kind of investing in these kind of grassroots education organizations that are operating both within the camp and throughout Karenni State. The film actually partners closely with the Karenni National College, if I recall correctly, which is a kind of a grassroots education Karenni-led organization that operates within Van Mine Isolate Refugee Camp or Camp 1. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the work that KNNC is doing. Maybe we can touch upon KSDC, which is the Karenni Social Development Center, which is an organization that I've worked with in the past and have close ties with and you're familiar with as well. So I know you've done fundraisers for them. And those are two of the kind of the major education organizations that are really pushing forward with a human rights-led community management ethos to educate the next generation of Karenni leaders. So I wonder if you could touch on some of the work and kind of the organization of KNNC specifically.
Yeah, for sure. We were very lucky to work with KNNC, which at the time was called KNCC.
Yeah.
It is the educational arm of the Karenni community on the Thai side of the border, associated with the refugee camp near Ban Mai Nai Soi in Thailand. KNNC provides education and leadership opportunities for Karenni youth, both inside of and outside of the refugee camp, and is part of the Karenni National Unity Organization. So it's part of the ethnic Karenni like bureaucracy, like local governance. KSDC is a small, as you said, community leadership oriented organization. And I think you can speak better to KSDC. I love working with these two organizations because they both empower different youth populations in very important, critical ways. And they both provide different educational tracks and inherently advanced educational opportunities for kids who might never get it. Here's why education for this age group and this particular vulnerable population is so important. The girls, 15 years old, if you leave high school, you'll probably become a parent before the age of 20 in this, community, just because as a refugee, you don't have identification and you're not allowed to work. So, family planning becomes less and less of an opportunity unless they have something else going for them, such as education. And as we all know, investment in young women's education in particular has an outsized impact in the overall health of the community, not just maternal health, but also community of, family health. And when you're prioritizing women's health through women's education, specifically at organizations such as KSDC, every young girl who's allowed to continue her education for a single additional year is enhancing the overall mental, spiritual, professional, educational health of the whole community. And for young men as well, they often need to do backbreaking work in order, under the table in order to have resources, which most young men want to be able to provide to their own families in some capacity. And often it leads them into a drug cycle and alcoholism, and frankly, dehumanizing conditions that no person should have to endure. So when we can give educational opportunities to youth, either through organizations such as KSDC or KNNC, we're enabling the next generation to be that much closer to providing their own solutions for themselves. And what's at stake is if this generation of 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds loses, even by a single year, their access to education, because if you lose it for 1 year, you're that much less likely to continue the following year. We are then waiting for the next generation to exit the poverty gap. So this couldn't be more urgent. And every successive year that we can help 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 youths within this population, we're actually helping them to give themselves their own resources to craft and navigate their own future.
Absolutely. And given the recent circumstances in Myanmar and in the camps with lack of resources, I would argue that the need for this community-based education has never been greater. And a lot of these schools, KNNC and KSDC included, are currently experiencing funding crises. So if folks are looking for a way to get involved maybe outside of their own communities, like you said, kind of outside supporting Karenni refugee groups or other refugee groups in their own communities, if you want to support the vital work of these schools, you can do that. You can donate directly through their websites, which we can include. Katie, we can get you those links as well. Because the work, I agree, is absolutely vital, and seeing the outcome firsthand, it's I spent quite a bit of time there as a trainer. You do see the impact directly of the education, and how it not only impacts people's livelihoods, but just increases their interaction with the community around them and their understanding of these really complex issues of conflict and politics and things, and it is quite empowering.
I've seen a number of the people that we featured in the film, as well as students that we've sponsored through our various fundraisers, actually go on to be community organizers, actually go on to provide resources to their own community through this moment of crisis. And it's not theoretical. Like, no. I know specific individuals who have continued in through university and on to community organization in a crucial way, especially when you're dealing with, when you're dealing with civil war, you're dealing with trauma. And as a community, you need to reconcile and move forward. And it's not just about public policy. It's also really about the spiritual. And I say that in a psychological way, the spiritual, it's a core capacity of the rights of children around the world. And I think when we invest in youth education specifically, or in the health of a community, we're really investing in the future of the community as a whole.
Yes, great. I could not agree more.
Yeah. Yay. Let's do it. I really think we should. I don't want to mess up my own personal taxes, but because I have potentially done that before, but there are 501c3s who I could recommend. There's one in particular that I've worked with a lot, but it's a religious organization. It's called Love on Mission. And I don't have a fundraiser with them right now. And I think they actually have their own slate. So I need to discuss it with them. I mean, we could put it in the notes or whatever as another organization people could organically research, because they genuinely, that's Daryl Hayes from North Carolina. Do you know him?
I haven't met him directly, but I've heard about him for sure.
We've done fundraisers together. He has some of my money that I've raised to give to some of these students. So we choose 1 or 2 students a semester who are at risk of dropping out, basically. And we cover their fees. So they don't drop out. It's like an emergency fund. And we can do something similar. So when we're off the line, we should figure something out. I don't know if it's too late to include it in this publication, depending on how much time you have between now and go live, but.
I don't believe the publication's going out until the fall, so we could possibly throw something together. But even
if you guys think it's appropriate, I don't know, we could throw it into the show notes, or not show notes, but you know what I mean. Even
if we can't get something together in time, happy to be involved in something going forward.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah. Did I give you a good conclusion? Was there more? I forget.
I think that was good. I mean, the last question was about the impact the films had, but we kind of already touched upon that. We didn't talk about the production process much. I don't know if you want to talk about the production process. You're welcome to.
Sure. Yeah. Producing Like We Don't Exist was unlike any project I've ever done before. That it took a long time when you're not a member of a community that's been through as much as the Karenni have. It's very important to take time. And in filmmaking, there's a concept called parachuting that we really want to avoid, which is flying in and filming and flying out right away, and just spending time with people. So drinking tea, visiting parents, going on walks, going through different parts of the community, walking around, living there. That was pretty crucial to our production process, making friends, learning first names, playing with kids, that kind of thing. Just before we ever lifted the camera, that was very important for us to truly get to know these people on a human level. Going forward, we needed to build a narrative, which was many common themes surrounding the Karenni experience. So we sort of sat down with some people from within the Karenni community and basically outlined core themes: women's issues, education, some of these other themes that I told you about before that are in the film, and identified community members whose personal story exemplified those core themes. And we sat down with all of those community members: older women, soldiers, students, laborers, retired people, young children, politicians, day laborers, all different kinds of people across the human experience, and tried as much as possible to ask them the same core questions, which are: what makes you happy? What are you proud of? What are you afraid of? Always asking the same questions, and really, as much as possible, ennobling their experience, no matter what they shared with us. And there came a certain degree of trust. When you're asking somebody about the worst day of their life, you know, you have to take your time, and it's not just about the headlines as well. It's also about the small joys of their lives. And we didn't want to just focus on the negative, but also ask them what gave them peace, what gave them hope, what they like most about their parents or about their neighbors or about their kids, which really creates that sense of human connection with the viewer, because they might also feel the same way. They might answer the question the same way. So it was narratively building this human connection that surpasses language or experience. And it really brings the experience of civil war under a very close lens, because it just shows how unnecessary and disruptive it is in the greater arc of human experience. And then editorially, as much as possible, trying to make each sequence just kind of make sense. Cutting different voices together is always a bit of a risk. So making sure that we showed it to members of the Karenni community and took their feedback. You know, sometimes something didn't work, so we took it out. Sometimes something was too sensitive. You know, some members of our crew were harassed, threatened, followed. You know, we were followed when we were in Myanmar. The security of people who don't hold an American passport is a very real concern for us, and making sure to obscure personal information, even, you know, with the consent that they gave us and the blessing that they gave us to share their story. Sometimes we had to make some choices so that we could protect their identity. This is all part of the filmmaking process. And I think there's greater lessons to be learned within the academic community as well, because so often we discount the position and power of art and the way that we can be middle-brained. You know, we can deeply study and quantitatively analyze variables that, you know, when increased or decreased, have an impact on society. But I think we can't discount at all the breadth of human experience and what it feels like to simply listen. Just listen to their story. And so we tried as much as possible to listen. And that's why you don't hear our voice as a narrator. The audience members asked to listen.
Great. Yeah, I think the film does an excellent job of doing just that. You know, back to centering Karenni voices, listening to, you know, personal experiences, and also, like you said, I think it's really important to, you know, build relationships with community members and folks you're working with, and listen to, you know, not just the negatives, but also think about, you know, the positives as well. And that's something people don't think about sometimes when they think about refugee communities. I know the first time I visited the refugee camp, obviously it's a difficult situation and difficult context, but I was blown away by just the life going on around me. You know, folks are living their lives and they're laughing and joking, and kids are playing, you know, with balls and they're playing sports and volleyball and things like that. And these are things that people that are removed from these contexts don't associate with refugee communities. But in a lot of ways, they're just living the human experience, you know, obviously under different circumstances, but it's important to factor in those positive, you know, the essence of being human. These people still possess that, and it's still very much part of these communities and what's going on. And I think it's important to remember that this is still happening, and it's important to highlight.
Yeah, and recognizing joy as part of the human experience. I mean, sometimes the refugee or migrant experience doesn't look like what we expect it to. And often there's all kinds of value-based judgments that come in, and we need to dismantle that as well. And, you know, as much as possible, listen to their experience, listen to their lived experience. Like, I probably should have had a Karenni person speaking with me today, because I'm just a white person who was a witness for some time to the issue, and I brought to bear my professional and artistic, you know, editorial skills. But besides that, this conversation is really an opportunity to remember that they deserve joy, they deserve peace, they deserve reconciliation. And part of the first step of that is listening to their story and acknowledging the experience that they've been through. And we won't spend all the time in the future doing that, but even just to memorialize and archive this moment in time so that future generations may recognize and remember the lasting impact that this conflict has had, and unfortunately probably will continue to have. I think that's really the first step towards progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think this conflict has definitely brought out and kind of highlighted the sheer determination of the Karenni and other ethnic groups, and even ethnically Burmese people across Myanmar, just the determination for self-governance, for freedom, for democratic rule, for these concepts that we so often take for granted. I think that the eruption of violence over the past year has really kind of highlighted that, yes, this is a very core central tenet to what these people are fighting for.
Yeah. And there's lessons to be learned, and unfortunately commonality to be drawn across the Rohingya experience, the Karenni experience, the Ukrainian experience, the Syrian experience. So it's an important lesson to learn so that we don't repeat our mistakes, I think.